Bob, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you making the time. I want to give just a little bit of brief background. To be frank, you have one of the most interesting founder profiles. I've seen founders go from founder to VC. You've done the reverse. You started your career at Insight Partners. And since then, you have done 3 startups, successfully exited from 2, and now you are working on your most ambitious project, Crossbeam. And you're also the writer of the upcoming book,
Ecosystem-led growth. It's
Ecosystem-led growth.
Coming out on March 12th. So right away here, you're getting me right in the right moment.
One of the things that impressed me most about you is that you're already a successful founder who have successfully exited from his previous endeavors. What can you tell us a little bit more about what motivated to go for the most ambitious project, Crossbeam, now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm out of my mind, I think is the honest answer. I was just having a conversation with one of my board members this morning about repeat founders, and he was talking about how venture firms are always very, very bullish on working with repeat founders. I tried to double click on that a little bit, and I think what's actually the crux of that point of view is not so much that it's repeat founders, but it's that people that have experience and a chip on their shoulder. And I think that is a little bit of my story as well, right? Which is I've got a chip on my shoulder because I'm from Philadelphia and it's just kind of our thing around here. But B, I kind of have this Goldilocks thing going on where my first company, RJ Metrics, I ran it for 8 years. We went through basically every possible startup experience you can have. Like, we bootstrapped it profitably, and then we had this incredible surge of product market fit, and we raised venture money and grew a really big team. We were kind of disrupted by movements and new markets emerging and new players showing up late in our life, and our growth kind of slowed down. And then we sold to one of our biggest partners, a company called Magento, and then we got to be, inside of a bigger mothership for some period. We kind of got to do it all. In a way, it's almost like we held onto it for too long. Like, we missed our window of the hype cycle. And then my second company, Stitch, we sold it after 18 months. Everything just worked well. We picked a good bet in a market that was hot. It grew really fast. The product worked great. And we got a really, really aggressive offer from an acquirer that was a public company that wanted to get into our space. And they kind of made us an offer we couldn't refuse. And we took it. But we were running that company for less than 2 years. I mentioned the Goldilocks thing because it's like, I was inexperienced, learning on the job the whole way, maybe held onto it for too long or wasn't strategic enough. And then the other one was, hey, I finally kind of know what I'm doing, and we picked a great idea and something that works, but we sold it almost instantly and didn't really get to stick with it and see it all the way through. And the hope with Crossbeam is that you get to kind of combine those worlds, which is you have an idea that works well, that resonates with people, that has great product market fit throughout, where there's kind of a 10-year vision at all times around where this thing goes, and you hang on to it and you see it through. Just at the very beginning of year 6 here on what I'm certain will be a 10+ year journey with this business. It's proving to be that just right combination, at least so far. Kind of had to do it in order to complete the sense of really seeing what's possible when you push experience and patience.
One of the things that I focus on a lot, which is especially for early stage startups, hiring for attributes rather than a resume. It was really surprising hearing this from you. Chip over shoulder is one of the attributes that I look for, because I really look for people who are hungry, have something to prove in a positive light. How do you define chip over shoulder for specifically you as a founder?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a little bit of feeling like I have something to prove. Still, there's some unmet eventuality that just has not happened yet, but that you feel like is possible and has just not been realized. That can lead to being energized by the idea of pursuing something. It can also lead to kind of like having sharp edges and a willingness to be very shrewd and very direct and very deliberate and methodical and focused on trying to make that reality come true. Because the bigger the chip on the shoulder is, the more you're constantly aware of it, right? And kind of chewing glass and going through the hard things that inevitably come up when you're building a business. With that chip on your shoulder, you've kind of got this really interesting combination of like muscle memory and scar tissue, right? That are kind of working together to help you navigate these hard times. And you're not allowing yourself to just sit in it when something's not working. Which I think in my first company, I think we did a couple of times. I had a harder time being intellectually honest and, making hard calls and doing the hard things. Yeah. I mean, I think it really adds up to that, right? Like feeling like there's some unresolved thing that needs to be done or accomplished, and that will stop at nothing in order to prove that it's possible.
I love how you put it, because from outside at times, startups looks like this glamorous endeavor.
Yeah,
but from inside, it really doesn't feel that way. And a founder has to put in at least a decade to get anything out of that endeavor. And unless you have that drive and that long-term appetite, I don't know how anyone could be successful as a founder.
They always say rule number one in startups is just don't die, right? Just don't die. It's just like continue to exist. But you combine that with what I just said about the chip on the shoulder, and like, is that really enough? I think it's a matter of being resilient and protecting yourself and not allowing yourself to get burnt out, but also using that energy that you recover by protecting yourself to do extremely high leverage strategic things, and not ignore where the puck is going or ignore what's necessary in order to build the biggest and most interesting possible version of whatever you're working.
How do you define ecosystem-led growth from your point of view? And I want to learn a little bit more about what led you to go into this arduous journey of writing a book.
Ecosystem-led growth it's a go-to-market motion, and it's one that leverages partner ecosystems as basically the primary lever for attracting and converting and retaining customers. So it's not the same as partnerships, right? Which kind of has a much broader definition and a lot of different potential North Stars depending on the company and the stage. ELG is the same for everybody. It is about how to grow your business faster and more efficiently by using all the great outputs that you get from building a partner ecosystem. So it's really the playbook for the sales team, for the marketing team, for the customer success team, that leans on the data and relationships from your partner network. That's a really important distinction. And it's one that, when we think about the content marketing or thought leadership side of it, ends up becoming material because it impacts who the target audience is and who it is that we're actually talking to. We love partnership professionals. Our company's mascot is named Pam because it's short for partner account manager, right? Like it goes back to the DNA of our company, of those are our biggest champions. But in that same breath, I think we'd be underserving them if we weren't helping the partnership teams become an increased point of leverage for these other leaders in the go-to-market org that are kind of, the closest to the actual numbers that matter most to the business, right? The reps actually closing the deals, the marketers actually generating the pipeline, the customer success teams growing and retaining accounts. So ELG lives with those folks, and the partner teams are kind of this enabling layer, almost like this kind of, ops style strategic layer that makes it all possible. Personas end up mattering a lot when you're doing this content marketing because it's a question of who you're speaking to. And that was where the book felt important, because it wasn't just the kind of thing where a blog post or two would do the job, or going and speaking at 100 different conferences would solve for getting the word out. There really was an opportunity to pull together the important pieces, which is, what is this thing? Why now? And how are the best companies in the world doing it? And how do I roll that out at my company, right? Which is really there's 4 parts in the book, and those are the 4 parts, right? It's kind of like the historical context, the why now, the playbooks, and the operationalizing of them. You don't want to write one of these books when you either don't have an audience or you don't have market pool, right? We said, let's go for it after meeting with our publisher and realizing that there's a very real audience for this stuff. It looks like, based on pre-sale data, will likely land on the Publishers Weekly national bestseller list on the first week that it's out, which is wild to me and super, super exciting. This is not us needing to push it out to market. There is inherent product market fit for this messaging and this language. And to me, that's a prerequisite for putting in the effort and the energy to actually do this in the first place. This is not a thing where a book will create a movement. This is a thing where there is already a movement, and no one has actually put together the singular thing that everyone who's trying to participate in that movement can point to and say, this is our rallying point. And that's the purpose of this book and the reason for doing it now rather than 5 years ago or waiting another 5 years. Like ELG is kind of having a moment right now.
I would love you to a little bit more explore why now for ELG. I happen to think that there is major tailwinds on this front. Why would SaaS founders and SaaS go-to-market leaders should be thinking about ecosystem-led growth now?
We're at this very interesting moment where in the last 5 years, anybody that's in the SaaS universe specifically has gone through this incredible whiplash, right? The pandemic kind of bringing on this zero interest rate era, which made capital extremely cheap. Basically, every SaaS company in the world got all the money that they wanted. And the only thing that they were asked to do with it is grow. In that time, every growth strategy sounded like a good growth strategy. Like ELG was one of them, but hiring an army of SDRs was also pretty popular in that time. And a lot of companies that enable that sold a lot of software and services to do it. Inbound marketing, content marketing, thought leadership, the growth of those strategies, how many companies hired an internal, basically publishing house effectively, right, within their companies to do that kind of work. Ad spending went up like crazy. The competitiveness of limited ad inventory just like pushed those prices up higher than ever. And then you get to 2023 and the Fed starts raising rates and you have this massive, massive correction. And it is this incredible humbling of all the companies that are in that SaaS space. It turns out growth is not the only thing that matters. It's efficient growth. You can't just hunker down and stop growing and stop spending. You have to continue growing. You just can't spend like a drunken sailor anymore. And then you look back at these strategies and you realize that many of them are kind of deeply challenged as you look to using them in the next couple of years in that way. Inbound marketing, what AI is going to do for content generation, for search engine consumption and like the discovery patterns of how people identify the products and services they want to buy and find those companies and connect to them. Like long tail search engine terms will suddenly be flooded with content. And also people are going to stop using search engines to find them in the first place. That whole entire set of motions is going to have to be rebuilt and reconstructed in the post AI era. And then there's outbound, cold outbound. Well, in a world where money is no object, you can just, spend $10 on SDRs for every dollar of pipeline that you generate. But the reality is that cold outbound email that is not extremely hyper targeted and personalized with a why now and a very curated message to it is just going into this negative sum game of everybody's email inboxes being oversaturated and attention spans being lower than ever. And just like outbound just like kind of has stopped working. It's no longer ROI positive because of the oversaturation and the default skepticism of cold inbound arriving to people. So then you can look at ads and say, well, we've got GDPR and CCPA and Apple allowing end users to just like kill all the cookies and tracking mechanisms inside of mobile apps. And just like the quality of targeting and the ad inventory has suffered as a result of that. And the ad industry is very creative and has been able to do a lot of things to fill those gaps. And revenues are still up, but the quality of the end experience from an ROI perspective and the ability to leverage targeted advertising to drive ROI positive investments is still something that's not in great footing, and very, very few, if any, companies are fundamentally building their business on. So what's left? Ecosystems are kind of this really interesting like phoenix that rises from the ashes in this moment and gives a really good why now to this whole thing. They were there 3 years ago, but nobody cared about efficiency. And what we have in this moment is they have efficiency and scale. Both things are true at the same time. And that is really, really rare in this environment. And when you specifically think about ecosystems as a go-to-market lever, but it's really about how can I qualify my sales pipeline to make sure I'm spending time with the right accounts? How can I make sure that my messaging and positioning and the ways in which I sell into those accounts and differentiate from competitors and get the right voices and the right messaging in the sales process? And then how do I retain and grow those accounts once I've won them? Looking at that through an ecosystem lens, it's this incredible, incredible force multiplier that just like really lands more highly qualified stuff in your pipeline and makes sure that stuff makes it through to the end and has high lifetime value. That is why this is the moment for it, because this is what the market is demanding. And it's applicable to just a larger universe of companies than ever because everybody's an ecosystem business these days, especially in SaaS.
Is there an ideal stage where the founders of SaaS companies should start thinking about ecosystem-led growth? Like, what does the ideal stage and also ideal company look like who can really leverage this go-to-market motion best?
So we go into this in the book. There's kind of this question of is ELG right for me? I usually answer these questions using like a 2x2 matrix, right? Because the reality is that two things really need to be true for it to be right for you. You can think about a company on the dimension of its scale and its size, and usually that has to do with a revenue level or a customer count or something in that universe. And then the other dimension you can think on is just how much ecosystem DNA exists in that business in terms of the way in which it creates value for its customers. And what I mean by that is, think about it from the buyer's perspective. When somebody buys this product and implements it and really uses it inside their company, how much is the existence of other products or services something that increases or enhances or is even required in order for value to get fully realized? In the modern SaaS era, almost every SaaS company has at least some kind of ecosystem DNA, right? If you're in the Salesforce App Exchange or you integrate with a CRM system in the sales or marketing world, like boom, there it is right there, right? Like you've got this kind of, if that CRM system got ripped out, there's a pretty good chance that you would kind of be on the chopping block as well. If you're in the modern data stack, right, you probably have some tie into Snowflake or Redshift or BigQuery, right? There's some data warehouse or something, or Databricks, right, at the core of what it is that you hook into to deliver your value. If you're in retail, you've probably got Shopify or BigCommerce or Magento Commerce Cloud that's underpinning everything. So even the smallest startups in the world might have really, really strong ecosystem DNA. That means you win more often and you deliver more value when you appear alongside other products, even if you don't have direct integrations. Like you're part of an ecosystem. By looking at those two dimensions, the scale and the ecosystem DNA, you can kind of build like a scatter plot and almost like four box it, right? The bottom left of that scatter plot is I'm small and I don't have much ecosystem DNA. Maybe I'm an old school license and maintenance software product. People install it on a CD-ROM and it's kind of a single player mode experience. And if you're not a very big business and that's true, frankly, ELG is probably not right for you. Or at least you want to wait until either you become larger and go into the top left, or you pivot your business or, redefine your product in a way that's more ecosystem centric and you drift over to the right. The top right of that graph is also obvious, which is go, go, go. ELG is like probably the primary way in which you grow your business, right? High ecosystem DNA, large amounts of scale. Partner ecosystems are at and beyond a certain scale, basically the only growth lever that really matches the scale and magnitude of a large, like publicly traded business. Like it's rare to find a SaaS company that has reached late stage, large enterprise scale where partner ecosystems aren't effectively present in 100% of the deals that they're doing in customer accounts that work. So then you've got those other two boxes. These are the interesting ones. And this is where most companies live. The top left would be, I don't have a lot of ecosystem DNA, but I do have scale. For those companies, you do have some really interesting plays, because even if you don't have third-party integrations, even if you don't have a big like service provider, like agency ecosystem, what you do have is gravitational pull. Like other companies will care about wanting to cross-pollinate their customer base or their prospect list or whatever with yours, because yours is large enough and substantial enough and interesting enough. So that allows you to run a lot of the playbooks that show up in the ecosystem-led growth book, even before you've built out any of those integrations or kind of done the heavy lifting of bringing an ecosystem to life. Because you can run the analysis on saying, look, there's 500 companies that would love to work more closely with me. Let's see which ones actually have the largest universe of overlapping customers. And then when those customers do overlap, what's the profile of those accounts? Are they better? Are they bigger? Did they close faster? Have they been customers for longer? This is exactly what Crossbeam does. Right? You connect with those 500 partners. You give very, very limited sharing rights, but you do enough to do kind of rolled up analytics on the data. And you say, okay, wow, of these 500, here are the 10 that if we could have more customers like the ones that overlap with this business, it would be transformative and extremely meaningful to the way that we think about growing this company. And that allows you to start kind of doing this crawl, walk, run of how can we take a bite out of an ecosystem strategy that maybe pulls us to the right on that graph and has the highest possible probability of being successful. And we really encourage people to try and like invert that J curve. It's not, you have to invest a bunch and then you figure out whether or not it worked. It's that you actually are able to use the data to figure out what will work, and then you decide to make the investment. On the bottom right, the final quadrant, and then I'll stop ranting about 2x2 matrices. This is a company that's got very low scale. It's a small company, but their ecosystem DNA is very high. This is every startup in SaaS that's been created in the last 7 to 10 years, right? Aside from the top 1% unicorn companies, most of them are hanging out in that bottom right quadrant. This is a gold mine because it means that you can be running this stuff from day zero. You don't even need a full-time dedicated partnerships hire, because very likely your product team or your founders at a core level have infused the coexistence of your product with other products or with kind of a paradigm around which people buy software and utilize software, just built into the way that you even think about or talk about your value proposition. People do this naturally without even thinking about it, which is like, oh, any modern company really needs to leverage our product because it makes their sales reps more efficient. You got to ask, what else are the sales reps doing? Well, they're trying to generate pipeline. They're doing it in CRM systems. They're probably using a whole universe of other tools. Your tool is probably not competitive, but it's somehow complementary to all this other stuff they're using. And even if it's not tightly integrated, even if you're not officially partners from a technology standpoint with these other companies, you can still make the case to a buyer that if you're using A, B, and C, then our product, which is D, is going to be even more valuable to you than it is to anybody else. And with something like Crossbeam in the mix, you can form a go-to-market partnership with these other players in the space that you very often sell or exist right alongside of, and figure out who your joint customers are, create those case studies, create those positioning statements so that you can all cross-pollinate your sales pipelines and your customer bases in a way where people end up buying a fabric of technologies that are very often kind of coexisting or tightly coupling with each other. Even if you're really, really small, there's motivation for that, even from very large companies you might want to partner with, because when they can do it at scale across all the small partners and it's not a huge burden to do, the aggregate of that becomes a really meaningful strategy and data point for them. That is the way to think about it. It's like put yourself on that matrix and then run the playbook that applies.
One of the things you mentioned while we were discussing why now was the Zerp era. Do you believe, are we completely done with growth at all cost?
What was unique about the Zerp era is that it just kind of categorically applied. It applied like horizontally across an entire like financial category of like a financial class of companies, which is like growth companies. Like a lot of money got stuffed into like an entire horizontal class of businesses, and that was SaaS. And we hadn't seen that since 2000, right? Or 1999. The more historical way that these things tend to happen is that you get these micro bubbles that exist within certain use cases or universes, right? Back when I was running my first company, RJ Metrics, there was like a big data bubble. Every company related to data or analytics or something suddenly became valued at a really interesting multiple. Shortly before the Zerp era even hit, I think a lot of these PLG businesses, I think, had a real glory day and could attract valuations at revenue multiples that were kind of like not necessarily in sync with the public markets, but they reflected like there's some secret sauce going on here. What we're seeing right now is like, look at AI right now. Like you might think it's 2021 if you look at some of these AI deals getting done. There are a lot of investment companies who want to have a position in AI and a finite number of worthy places to park that capital and establish those positions. And it's just supply demand. It drives the prices up, the valuations go up, the due diligence kind of becomes thinner and thinner. And we see that right now in AI. And look, there's going to be absolutely incredible AI companies that make tremendous returns for their investors. And there's going to be flameouts that go to zero or worse. The job of the VCs is to pick them. But when a space is hot, then the picking becomes maybe less important than the having a position at all. You get into these cycles. So, the Zerp era was special, but that doesn't mean that it's over. You just have to look out for these like hype cycles. And no matter what happens with one, another one will show up to take its place, right? That is the only guarantee.
As a buyer, it was really interesting on the tail end of 21 cycle. I remember heavily investing in data stack. And for the life of me, I couldn't get a demo without talking to 4 people. The SDR, the account executive, the account manager, and then the sales engineer. And I was baffled by the amount of hoops that I needed to jump through just to get a demo. And the lack of discipline around sales teams and sales teams not being able to give something as fundamental as a product demo without a sales engineer for a less than $25,000 ACV product was just mind-boggling.
I think when markets get hot or demand gets really high, when there's like this data pool that exists, the companies that are in those spaces sometimes suffer from a very unique and ephemeral problem, which is they actually can't handle the amount of inbound demand that is showing up in a way that creates a rational experience for the average buyer. If you're a company that's in a super hot space and all of a sudden 200 people a day are filling out the form requesting to talk to sales, it seems very, very rational from your perspective trying to operationalize a company to say, okay, well, we should have some screening process. We should kick some people to an SDR, and the role of the SDR kind of shifts from being a seller who's trying to convince the person on the other line that they ought to buy the product into a qualifier who's trying to figure out whether or not the person on the other end of the line is worth the time of an account executive, let alone a sales engineer or whoever else might get attached to you. You think about a space like AI or even a space like big data, so broad, the terms there, right? Like my company, RJ Metrics, I think our old tagline was like, data-driven decisions are better decisions. Or like, we give you all your data anywhere you need it, right? It's these intentionally vague, like honeypots that can basically make anybody feel like this is going to solve their problem no matter what it is. And that is dangerous, dangerous territory because, yeah, you create a lot of inbound demand gen, but it also can wildly dilute the focus of what your product actually does and who they do it for. We're living in that world now, but I think in the modern data stack era, your buying experience, I'm not surprised by it all. These companies probably did what felt like a rational thing, which is like put this screening in to protect their own teams to try and just close. They were going to close stuff no matter what. The question is, can we close the best stuff where we're likely to create enough value and the person's able to pay us a lot of money for it? And everybody else kind of didn't make it through that screening. But then, markets get soft again and everything flips on its head and those people all end up getting laid off, right? And then everything goes straight to AEs again. And that's what we've seen in the last year or two.
You've been at this game for over 15 years now, and I want to learn from you how your thinking evolved over time when it comes to hiring and building teams.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What were your core beliefs early on into your entrepreneurship journey when it comes to hiring and building teams? And then how that has evolved over time and what that looks like today?
It's a very complex question and probably answer, but maybe the best way to do it is kind of step through what that logic looked like at my three different companies, because I was at a very different level of experience and stage of my career in each one. At my first company, RJ Metrics, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing from a hiring standpoint. The only other place I had worked was a venture capital firm, and that venture capital firm was only 40 people, and I never hired anybody. And then I found myself in the CEO seat looking to add people to a team. And our first handful of hires were all engineers. We did what it seemed like you should do based on what we had seen like on TV and in the movies, right? Okay, we're going to put up a job board. We're going to try to drive people to that job board by, I don't know, getting some local press or getting some people to talk about our company and how interesting it is. And then we're going to look at all the resumes and we're going to pick the ones that sound like the best fit. And we're going to meet those people and hire the ones we like. I can't explain to you how many overwhelmingly systemically flawed assumptions are kind of baked into every step of that process that I just described that have really not persisted, much, much longer. The cool thing about early stage startups, especially when you're working on something interesting, is you do tend to get very, very lucky around being able to hire people who are better than your company is. Like our first hire at RJ Metrics was this guy named Chris Merrick. He was hired as an engineer, and he ended up being leading our entire engineering team and then being the CTO at Stitch, our second company. And he's since become one of the co-founders of a company called Omni, which is a modern business intelligence platform, which is like a really kick-ass product that everybody should check out. This is a guy who super smart, extremely disciplined, really hard worker. We got the benefit of working with him for over 10 years across multiple companies. What are the odds that the first person you hire at a company where you have no idea what you're doing hiring wise turns out to be Chris Merrick, right? There's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy component here, which is like, it's actually really compelling and interesting to be the first employee at a startup. The 20th employee, maybe a little less. The 200th employee, maybe a little less. And one of the biggest truisms that's been a hard pill to swallow is the truth that what got you here won't get you there. There are absolutely incredible unicorn humans who can show up at a 3-person company and be really influential and valuable and kick ass. And then as the company levels up to its next era and it's 50 people, and there's a layer of management that's kind of been installed, and the demand is different and the financial profile is different, they can transform into being an ideal operator in that stage of company and stay relevant, right? And I've met many of these people. Many of them work at Crossbeam today, or Chris Merrick's a great example. But at the same time, there's some people who just are really, really, really good at early stage startups, are really good at mid stage startups, but are like, not meant for the sub 10 people stage. And the question is like how much you are aware of and honest about and transparent about how that's going along the way with them in their journeys in those roles. Because if you look at the early Crossbeam team, We have a lot of people from those early days that are still here, but probably more than half of them are not. If you look at the original like 12 or so people, there are these situations that show up as companies grow where you get to a certain stage as a founder. And if you're lucky enough as the founding CEO to survive that long, you might pop your head up one day and look around and say, this is like a ship of Theseus, right? It's very, very few of the people that felt like the most important people at the company in year 2 or 3 are still there in year 9 or 10 and as important to the company as they were then. And it's not to devalue their contributions or how important they were. It's to say that like the company is a living, breathing being who has needs that really evolve over time. We talk about product market fit as startup people all the time. Well, there's also an employee company fit, right? That you think about, employees can get stronger and the employee kind of moves on that spectrum, but the company moves too. And there is a real thing that is the drift that happens between the phase that people are well suited for and where they are in their careers and what it is they're trying to accomplish. And it's just in a decent percentage of the time in these things, it's better to kind of look to how can we put somebody in the seat that's the right person for the job in this season of life of the company than it is to just assume that every single person who ever comes on, if they're ever not there, it's inherently a failure. And I think at RJ Metrics, I had that mentality. Like every single time we ever lost anybody, it like hurt me personally if they left on their own, and we never fired anybody. We were just like not good at performance management and not good at being self-aware. It was really a long, long time before we really focused in on that in a really concerted way. And I think at Crossbeam, like we have a lot of people that are real long-term crossbeamers and they kick ass. And I think a lot of them I can think of right now. They're going to be great in the next phase of the company too. But we've also performance managed a lot of folks out. We've done layoffs in the past where we've just kind of had to pivot on strategy or kind of certain teams or directions just kind of haven't worked out. Those things are never easy, especially for the people affected by those changes. If you're not paying attention to it and being intellectually honest about it and reacting to it responsibly, it's something that puts all the jobs of everybody else at the company in jeopardy. And it puts the company itself in a position where it's just, not going to achieve its full potential. I think getting back to the chip on the shoulder topic, right? I mean, I think that's not an acceptable outcome for an experienced founder. So the hard things come into play.
Sometimes I think we take it too personal when it comes to this specific topic. At the end of the day, the amount of personal and professional development required to go, being a great employee at the C stage and still keeping that at Series B, Series C is just most of the time not a realistic expectation.
Yeah.
And having honest conversations about that journey early on and setting up the right expectations is the right thing to do, because at every distinct stage, what got you there won't get you to the next stage. Yeah. And unless the person has that at times inhuman ability to grow through all of those stages, it is an unreasonable expectation.
You mentioned setting expectations, and I think that's really great. I don't think that means everybody you hire, just giving them a speech. It's like, you're not going to be here forever. There's a lot of different kind of archetypes of people that join. There's people that are kind of like lifers and they kind of evolve over time and they really, really invest heavily in their skills along the way to make sure they're ready for the next phase of the company. There's people that really prefer a particular stage and that, if we outgrow that or they feel, less motivated by a new era they've entered into, they kind of move on. But I think the one common theme among those different types is the people who work hard and care. This experience is an absolute launching pad for the rest of their career. The one consistent through line is that they move up in their careers in seniority, experience. It's an extremely high density learning opportunity. And like if you show up willing to learn and experiment and fail and know when to lean in when it's working and be honest when it's not, whether you're here for 10 years or you're here for 2 years, on the other side of this will feel like an inflection point in your career. I can't promise you you'll be here in 10, but I can promise you that if you're willing to hold up your side of that bargain. And that's held up so true across all these companies, no matter how long the people stayed.
Who do you like? How would you define the ideal employee for the early stage startups? Like, what does that look like? If you were to sculpt somebody, right? Like, what are the attributes and traits that you look for and have seen consistently across the 3 companies that you built?
Yeah, I mean, the only rule is that there's no rule. Companies are different, and the needs of those companies are very different, and what they look like and what the North Star goal is inside of them can vary really greatly. And I think it's really about looking at who you want to bring on through the lens of what your next major milestones are, what mountains you're trying to climb in this next incremental period, and for whom the center of the Venn diagram is the highest.
If we were to exclusively focus on the early stage phase,
we very often use this paradigm at my companies of being T-shaped. The idea of the T-shape is, you look across the org chart of a company and you've got all these different disciplines, and someone who's very, very horizontal might be able to span a bunch of disciplines. They could be pretty good at a whole bunch of different jobs, and you can kind of slap them around. They could do a different thing today than they could tomorrow, whatever. And then there's the deep part of the T, and it's like, okay, how far down the specialization chain could you go? And when you look at candidates over the course of time in startups, it does generally average out to be true that the folks at those businesses tend to have a wider top of the T and shallower specialization. And you trade off specialization for flexibility and agility so that you can have an extremely fluid and dynamic team of people that gets reconfigured in order to do the job to be done of the day, because the speed with which you learn that really wasn't the job to be done and there's a whole other job is very high. And you want to be able to adapt to that without needing to fire a bunch of people and hire a bunch of people. So these like wide top of the T, not super deep people. As you get later and later stage, and who and what you are as a company and how you deliver value is more concrete, what you'll find is that you get a lot of the narrowing of the horizontal piece and the deepening of the specialization. And people that are more good at really specific things super deeply start to show up inside of your org chart. Now, the ideal hire at any stage is someone who is quote unquote T-shaped, which is they're wide and they're deep. They have some kind of thing that is world-class that they're one of the only people can do, and it's something that matters to your business, but they don't have to be doing that every single day. They don't have ego about it, and they have enough like generalist IQ that they can do a bunch of things inside the company. If you can screen for just T-shaped people in a bunch of different ways, then you're in really good shape. The trick is those people are hard to come by and they're expensive, and there's a lot of people that want to hire them. So you kind of have to create this blended environment. But as a founder, one of the things I really aspire to do is be as truly T-shaped as possible, right? Like I pick my bets on where to go deep, and I geek out on things that I have enough intellectual curiosity to keep my attention and allow me to go deep on. But also I consider it part of my responsibility to like kind of get it in terms of how all of the departments inside of the business function, at least at some regular level. Whereas if an emergency happened and I was put in charge of any, VP level role inside of the company, maybe I wouldn't be as good as the person who's in it today, but I could get by. I think founders ought to have that mentality as well.
I love that. I have one last question for you. What is your contrarian take on hiring that most would disagree with you?
I am naturally skeptical of hiring people from within existing employees' networks. I think there's a asterisk there, because some of the best hires I've ever made in my life came from within other employees' networks. And the conventional wisdom is like, these are by definition incredible people to hire because they are pre-vetted, because they're a known quantity. There's kind of like a level of understanding, like someone who's an A player ought to be able to say, I worked at another company with that person, they're an A player, we want them here. I think where companies get caught is that they can over-index so much on that they fail to actually run a process that stacks up that one particular person's point of view on a new hire against a field of candidates that are assessed in a consistent way. And whether it's priorities around equity in your hiring process and preventing, kind of a homogenous workforce, or it's efforts around just because someone is an A player at a totally different company with a different stage and a different value proposition and a different situation, that does not automatically translate to they're going to be an A player here. And if there's not a level of rigor around assessing the candidates based on your description of the jobs to be done inside of a certain role, if you drop the ball on that, then you can get into a spot where you end up having kind of a misfire hire, despite the fact that they came from somebody's network. What this does is it actually pushes the in-network hires to the extremes. Like the best people that you ever hire and the worst people that you ever hire that flame out the fastest will both come from that pool of candidates, unless you apply a very, very strong universal standard where those people certainly get a close look and you don't want to pass them by because of that network connection, but they don't get to skip steps. And you certainly don't, as a company, get to just make the hire without actually running a process or, spending the time to really think about the scope of the job or the job description and just hiring, somebody's A player buddy.
I love that. One of my biggest pet peeves is, especially for early stage startups, don't hire for pedigree. They might be one of the smartest people you've ever worked with, or they are really hardworking. The skill set might not really match with what you need at a startup. Bob, thank you so much for making the time. This was a truly amazing conversation. I appreciate you being here.
I appreciate the opportunity to get on my soapbox on a bunch of these things. It's a great topic. People don't talk about it enough. So congrats on a great program, and can't wait to see you again. I'm sure it won't be too long.